There can be no better way to celebrate our South Africanness than joining the global phenomenon that is spreading across the world, and that is the Jerusalem Dance Challenge. The Jerusalem song that I love so much. So I urge all of you to take up this challenge on Heritage Day and show the world what we are capable of. Our performers have demonstrated to the world that we've got good music and good dance and good moves. So quietly, let us celebrate our heritage.
My kingdom has not yet arrived. Until then, look after me. Ndilondoloze, and that is exactly what the economic recovery plan was meant to do. We await and await Cabinet to speak to us in one loud voice and then show us the promised land of economic recovery and the Jerusalem of prosperity. Good evening and welcome to Economics Unbound. Now, the OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, advises member countries across the world that stimulus packages must be both sufficient and timely. The support measures and the 500 billion stimulus package of South Africa were meant to be followed by an extensive plan to haul this economy out of the worst economic slump in a century. Perhaps, dear viewer, you have a little plan of your own, in your own life, in your own household, and perhaps in your own company or institution. Well, all these individual and collective plans hang on the National Recovery Plan, and we all await it from President Cyril Ramaphosa and his administration.
Yes, Tans, you're going on and on like a motivational speaker. Let me just get to the point and tell you all that according to the National Economic Development and Labour Council, NEDLAC, comprising of the government, labour, business and community as social partners, had set up a high-level working team to finalize an urgent economic recovery program for South Africa. Chaired by President Cyril Ramaphosa, the NEDLAC Forum for Economic Recovery met virtually and very frequently in the past few days and weeks to discuss how South Africa can extricate itself from economic difficulties that have been worsened by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. NEDLAC constituents agreed that the economic crisis is increasing levels of vulnerability, including extreme poverty and hunger, and that measures are required to stem further declines in GDP, a worsening of the budget deficit, and deeper job losses.
Yes, Nana, the social partners who gathered at NEDLAC also agreed that the fight against corruption must be intensified to ensure that wrongdoing does not undermine the economic recovery effort itself. According to the NEDLAC statement, the social partners have developed a significant degree of convergence and commonality on the grave nature of the economic challenge facing us and the need to identify and prioritize interventions and act urgently to move this economy forward. Consensus is emerging on what is to be done to achieve economic recovery, transformation, inclusive growth, and a globally competitive economy.
To deepen consensus and advance to action, NEDLAC constituencies nominated senior leadership to serve on a team that worked on the finalization of the document that the President presented last night. These agreements built on the foundation of the work done by social partners on implementing agreements reached at the Presidential Job Summit in 2018 and will include transforming the current Presidential Working Committee on the Job Summit into a Presidential Working Committee on Economic Recovery. The team focused on such areas as job creation, having a sectoral approach, prioritizing infrastructure, the need for urgent attention on energy security, and working on the bottlenecks to economic growth.
The team then presented NADLAC and the President with an economic recovery action plan that was to be submitted to Cabinet yesterday for endorsement. The President has been at pains to emphasize the shared responsibility faced by government, labour, business, community and all of us in addressing the challenges facing the country, and he commended the social partners on being united in this effort.
The President announced a major plan to reboot and to haul the South African economy out of its deepest recession in a century. The new policy plan will replace existing policy across the government areas of fiscal policy, tax policy, social policy, energy, and information technology policy. Data released by Stats SA indicated that the South African economy had contracted by 51% on an annualized basis. The plan will proceed in 3 phases. In the first phase, the government hopes to engage and preserve. This means it will work on building social support and consensus around the plan and emphasize the preservation of jobs throughout the economy. During this stage, further support for SMEs, vulnerable households and firms is mooted. Strengthening the financial system and supporting social stability will receive priority attention in Phase 1. In Phase 2, the government will look at supporting and opening up the economy while controlling the health risks. As the focus falls on implementation, the support of institutions and the creation of a capable state will be the focus, and so will fiscal reprioritization and SOE reform.
The country will have to wait a little longer for the much-anticipated National Economic Recovery Plan. This after Cabinet delayed the approval of the ambitious plan to salvage the economy from the ravages of the coronavirus pandemic and to create mass employment.
There was great expectation that President Cyril Ramaphosa would announce details of the recovery plan last night, but it wasn't to be.
Following several weeks of engagement, the social partners at NADLAC have made tremendous progress on an ambitious social compact for economic recovery. This represents a historic milestone for our country, demonstrating what can be achieved when we unite to confront an urgent crisis. Cabinet will build on this emerging common ground to finalize the country's economic reconstruction and recovery plan in the coming weeks.
Instead, the President announced a move to Level 1 national lockdown as widely expected.
While much economic activity resumed from June, it is now time to remove as many of the remaining restrictions on economic and social activity as it is reasonably safe to do.
While Level 1 lockdown allows the resumption of economic activity across all the sectors of the economy, the President warned that it will still take a long time for the global economy to recover from the devastation of the coronavirus pandemic, and that in turn will hamper the full recovery of the local economy.
The move to Alert Level 1 removes many of the remaining restrictions on economic activity, although it may be some time before it is safe and capable for all sectors to return to full operation. Global and domestic demand and supply of goods and services for some sectors will remain low for the foreseeable future, regardless of the lifting of restrictions.
The President also praised initiatives like the UIF Terrorist Benefit Scheme, which has provided billions of rand in financial support to affected workers. Mbongeni Muchwa, SABC News, Johannesburg.
The Economic Recovery Plan makes up an important part of measures that economic policymakers have taken in response to the financial and economic crisis. The plan is aimed at stopping the rising tide of poverty, malnutrition, and the degeneration of fabric of the South African society due to the economic crisis exacerbated by COVID-19. If the plan is to succeed, we will have to see the improved GDP figures. also known as the Economic Reconstruction and Economic Recovery Plan, NEGLEC, chaired by President Cyril Ramaphosa. The NEDLEC Forum for Economic Recovery met virtually to discuss how South Africa can extricate itself from economic difficulties that have been worsened by the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. The National Economic Development and Labour Council, NEDLEC, sets out 3 phases: engage and preserve, recover and reform, and develop and transform. It sets out priorities in each phase, including ensure social stability and massive healthcare response in phase 1, with phase 3 listing among other SOEs, which are state-owned enterprises, reform and cutting red tape and ease of doing businesses. The impact of economic crisis has led to increasing levels of vulnerability, including extreme poverty and hunger, with the poorest bearing the larger impact. The economy is in debt, and the fact that COVID-19 pandemic can spread more rapidly where there are labor-intensive industries accelerates structural change in the nature of work, thereby diminishing the use of labor. President Cyril Ramaphosa is promising that Cabinet will finalize a full economic recovery plan in the coming weeks. He announced last night that the economy would open up completely as the nation moves to level 1 on Sunday. The government has already kept and reprioritized 500 billion that has been dedicated to various interventions to keep the economy afloat. Those include special URF payments, which have now been extended to the next month. An optimum effect of the recovery plan on economic growth in the short term would be reached if a number of preconditions are met. It is clear that the growth-stimulating measures need to be timely, temporarily, and targeted conditions that are not always met. In this respect, an essential precondition is for there is no doubt about sustainability of government finances over the long run. The 200 billion rand loan guarantee scheme that's meant to keep businesses afloat during the COVID-19 pandemic and the associated lockdowns have also been tweaked.
Thank you very much, Prudie. Earlier on, my colleague Arabile Gumede spoke to economists about the expectations of the Economic Recovery Plan.
These policy change, policy reform that we were promised to come by the October MTBPS, that's now crucial. And I realize the president is talking about that. You got an agreement at NEDLEC. The cabinet is deciding about that next week. But these policy reforms are now crucial because if we get through this crisis, where are we headed in the medium term? Still no growth, or are we heading to somewhat a better path? We need to fix policy so we can improve confidence, because confidence could be the big driver in terms of medium-term growth.
Johan, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask then. Of course, yesterday there was also the expectation that maybe, just maybe, President Cyril Ramaphosa would announce some sort of economic future plan for South Africa, an economic recovery plan, beyond the one that he obviously announced earlier on this year with regards to the 500 billion rand stimulus package. Are you, one, disappointed at all that that did not come through? But two, what is it that you'd probably hope for when it comes to an economic recovery plan that he discussed with NEDLEC as well?
Yes, we've had a plans, Treasury's plan last year, the ANC plan, the Business for SA plan. But you know what? All of them are based on the NDP, the National Development Plan, which is actual ANC policy. It should just be implemented. And there's a whole bunch of other on the ANC government's list. On President Ramaphosa and Minister of Finance have said the things that they want to do: fix their state-owned enterprises, transform Eskom, get some extra energy online. These things have been slow, far too slow. Just implement the plans that's on the table.
Now, the South African Communist Party weighed in on the national economic recovery plans of the president. The Reds said that the government was still implementing austerity and the Treasury was still committed to implementing conservative economic policies. Speaking after its recent Central Committee meeting, party leaders said they support the president's broad recovery plans ahead of the most anticipated economic plan in a century.
One thing that we welcome is the president's commitment to some economic recovery plan or growth and development plan, as we would prefer to call it as the SACP, prioritizing infrastructure investment, for instance. We support that. That is why, though, in supporting that, we are pointing out that there are two main dangers and threats to that plan. One is austerity, cutting everything with no prioritization, to cut our nose, to spite our face, and secondly, looting and corruption. Those are the things that are a threat, as we say, in this plan. But we otherwise fully support it, and we need to ensure that we mobilize our own forces, the working class, to make sure that this plan indeed does succeed on our side. So we're going to be party, as the SACP, we have always sought to be party to the solution. We analyze because we want to find solutions. But it is going to be a global crisis. And also you are pointing at a danger, another danger, that what COVID-19 has done is not only just to further expose inequalities between the North and the South, but also it's worsening those inequalities.
With regard to the IMF and the World Bank, and the posture of our government, and particularly the Treasury, one may say that Treasury actually represents the most conservative and right-wing section of our government that is outrightly frustrated, and not only frustrated, but stagnated our economy from growing. We have a massive opportunity as this country to grow, but this Treasury has always anchored us in international organizations like the IMF, the World Bank, the OECD countries, and their prescripts on South Africa's economy. Even when they don't stay here, they just use general statistics about analysis of South Africa, and they give policy directives to the Treasury. And we have demonstrated that even to Minister Tito and to the leadership of our alliance. So the Treasury in our government, as much as it is an integral part of our government, it's a very problematic section of our government, and actually is the one that is stagnating the advance of our democratic revolution. We have to, at one point, confront this directly. In fact, if you look at the protection of finance capital right now in the COVID-19 pandemic, we had called from the beginning for the financial sector to protect people's mortgages, houses, cars, loans, and everything else, to have a period of a holiday period for payments. But what Treasury agreed with the banks was extremely nonsensical, something that actually extended by many years the loans of people. So they continue to feed finance capital in this country using this prescripts from this institution that I've just mentioned. So they represent the West of ourselves in government. The only good thing that they have is the fact that they do have functional teams. But for instance, a party that is in power, we can say to the Treasury, let them take the ANC manifesto, which we have all agreed as an alliance, and interpret it in implementation. You'll find that they are taking it the other way around. Because on any other thing, they say there's no money. They gave 200 billion to be handled by these big four banks, of big five banks in this country in the COVID-19 pandemic, 200 billion. How much of it was spent in the pandemic? When they've actually rejected to give same to developmental finance institution, less than 20 billion was spent. almost about 15 to 18 billion that has been spent.
On the line now, we are joined by Professor Peter Bauer of the University of Johannesburg, and he's from the Business and Economics Department there. Professor Bauer, good evening.
Good evening.
Thanks for joining us. Now, you've heard the Reds just now criticizing both Treasury and aspects of the government response to COVID-19 on the economic side. What is your general take on the recovery plan not coming out, as well as the government response thus far?
Okay, what I really do believe that we need to invest very heavily into our economy right now. We are starting to see the rest of the world economically starting to grow again. There are fluctuations and changes around the world in terms of increases and decreases in COVID rates amongst other countries, but we're also seeing a number of countries racing to develop, shall we say, vaccines against this particular disease, also this particular virus and this particular scenario. So we are seeing situations put into place that are going to mitigate much of the damage. But at the same time, we have got funds made available to us through the International Monetary Fund that we should be using right now to invest into our country. And as our previous speaker said, you know, we have issues such as inequality, poverty, unemployment. All these issues need to be addressed, and they need to be addressed now. And now would be a very good time for us to invest all of this as much as possible in the economy to give businesses an opportunity to start growing again.
Now, we've seen the figures coming out of Stats South Africa, a very frightful figure there of 51% annualized contraction in the South African economy. How do we recover? How do we begin to turn the tide on that figure? And yes.
Yeah, this is going to be for us a really big challenge. Right now, we are seeing people losing jobs, and many of them are not going to be able to be reemployed back into the economy because we are not growing fast enough, or we have not been able to, prior to the pandemic, we have not been able to grow fast enough in order to solve many of the problems. And then, of course, what we're going to start seeing is the expanded definition of unemployment is going to grow. We're looking at something over the 50% mark as well, which means 1 in 2 South Africans are going to be without jobs, which puts on huge social pressure on social systems, it puts pressures on households, and it puts pressures on other structures. This does not bode well for us. In order for us to actually turn this around, I believe we need to change the whole perception, the global perception about who we are in South Africa. We have to bring back investor confidence. And for that to happen, we need to do serious changes in terms of how South Africa mitigates the damage done through years of corruption and, shall we say, poor policies that we put into place, labor legislation issues, all the things that we need to turn around right now, because we have to give a very positive image about who South Africa is. I do believe that we've got the ability to grow, but there are going to be some very serious steps put into place right now in order to solve some of these problems.
Some people say that one of those very serious steps that we have to take right now is to, alongside the economic recovery plan, to actually re-stimulate the economy, to put another stimulus together. I listened to Francis Hurd, my colleague, speaking to Stuart Theobald, who's the head of Intellidex and who consulted on the 200 billion loan guarantee scheme. He said what we had previously should not be called a stimulus package, but an economic support package. And he said that it is now that South Africa should see and experience a stimulus package. What do you say to that?
Yes, absolutely. One of the factors that we need to bear in mind is that these stimulus packages come in the form of loans, and they will have to be repaid in the future. So as much money as we're pumping into our economy right now to stimulate growth, we are creating debt. And the level of debt, especially on government debt, that we have created across the country is now so high, it's been very difficult for us to actually mitigate the damages that are going to be created through this debt. But on the other side, we still need those monies in order to drive growth in this economy. But we must realize that every cent that we are investing to try and mitigate against COVID we are putting burdens on future generations because that debt has to be repaid.
Well, it has been argued that if you get that growth figure going and you really achieve meaningful growth in this economy, then that debt to GDP figure also looks different. And if you have more growth, since debt is expressed as a percentage of GDP, that debt figure will not look as frightening as it does right now.
That's correct, but the kind of growth we're going to need is very seriously far higher than the kind of growth figures that we've seen in the past. And in order to achieve this, we're going to need to really, really, really relook at how we have managed our economy in the past, especially since post-2007, and how we are now going to turn it around and actually make it work for us in a very positive way.
In his letter to the city press, or his letter in the city press, the finance minister, Mr. Tito Mboweni, said that he is looking to, in the mid-term budget statement in October, close that gap between expenditure and revenue in order to address this problem of debt. Do you think that is the right way to go? Clearly, the Reds think not.
Tito Mboweni is a highly intelligent and a highly brilliant man for this position. And I think he has run our Reserve Bank for many years flawlessly and with extreme precision. And I would put my faith into Tito Mboweni's quarters, but the challenge, and he realizes there are going to be huge challenges. And a big part of that is how much money we're spending on government right now versus how much we are actually seeing in terms of household consumption expenditure. And if we are not able to turn our expenditure into incomes and create jobs through, for example, additional spending, expanded public works programs, in order to create jobs, or in something constructive like investing in infrastructure such as in energy, we are going to be left behind.
Arguably, we need to stimulate consumption in the economy in order to drive GDP growth. What would you say to that? We need to spend our way through this.
Yes, we really do. And I think there are sectors of our economy, especially in terms of Eskom and energy production, that is critical right now. We need to invest heavily in healthcare and healthcare services. We have to invest heavily in education, and especially in primary and secondary level education, in order to generate those kind of returns. And in order to get something back from those returns. But we are looking at not being able to solve the problem in the short run, but most likely being able to put something into place that might help us grow, let's say, 5 or 6 years down the line.
Professor Bauer, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Now on Skype, thank you, sir. On Skype, we now have the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services, Edward Kiswete. Good evening, Mr. Kiswete. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening, Shandeka.
Well, we're going to see a new day in tax reform, are we?
Well, I mean, tax reform is very central to the success of our economy. Our fiscal framework at the moment is challenged because of an underperformance of tax revenue collection,
right,
and an expenditure that is outperforming our income. And so like any good household, if you're spending more than you earn, your overdraft grows, you borrow more money, you end up spending a lot of money, because we are trying to do to service your debt rather than to invest. So there are 3 things that we have to do, and tax is integral to the overall ecosystem within which. The first is we have to restore the fiscal integrity. The second is we have to invest in our social. We have become fragmented in social regions. Too many people are
Mr. Kiswete?
Yes.
Hi, we're struggling with the line a bit. can you move forward a bit, and we will see if we can improve on this line. You were...
Okay.
Let's take a break quickly, and we'll be back with you shortly. Welcome back. Now we continue our discussion with the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services, Mr. Edward Kiswete. Welcome back, Mr. Kiswete.
Hello, Chandika.
Hello. You were telling us, you were talking to us about what you think will be the reforms introduced in the post-COVID period as far as tax is concerned in this country.
So I think three things that are important, and they are interconnected to the well-being of our economy. The first is we have to restore fiscal integrity. And at the moment, our fiscal integrity is challenged in that we are spending too much money compared to what we are earning through tax revenue. And you know you can't continue that, it's not sustainable. So we have to bring a better balance between expenditure and income. On the income side, we have to restore the capability of SARS, because if SARS is underperforming, we are under-recovering. Secondly, we have to install confidence in SARS and in the system of government. If we don't address that, taxpayers feel morally justified to fiddle with their taxpayers, and we have declining levels of compliance.
But
and
Mr. Kiswete, also, arguably, we also have to restore the ability of the taxpayer to render unto Caesar, to honor their tax obligations, because with the kind of unemployment figures that we anticipate that we will see in the labor force figures when they come out this month, those figures are likely to reflect an absolute jobs bloodbath. And one of the key structural drivers of tax revenue collection is that pay as you earn that you get from all of us who work. Without that, and with these figures of unemployment, and with the devastation of household budgets, we're going to see so many people and households and companies unable to pay you your dues.
Absolutely. I'll come to that in a moment, but allow me just to add, the third factor is corruption and the integrity of our public and private sector. Those things further erode confidence. Coming to the point you raised, it's absolutely important. We cannot just reopen our economy, because during the lockdown period, we didn't just slow down economic activities, we lost economic capacity. So unless we create jobs, and unless we create new businesses and invest in productive capacity, our tax base will continue to shrink.
Now,
and that is ultimately what brings sustainable revenue.
Now
it's fixing the economy, expanding the economic capacity, and improving the capability of the Revenue Authority to collect that revenue that's due.
Now that's perfectly clear, Mr. Kiswete. There are some industries that gained a windfall during this COVID period, not due to any excellence or efficiencies of their own, but largely due to the nature, the inherent nature of the business, like delivery services, like IT companies. Now in this new virtual world, there are new winners. Are you contemplating taxing them more than you would tax those industries like tourism that were absolutely devastated during this pandemic?
A few points, Chandeka. It's an important question. The first is that tax policy is ultimately the preserve of the Minister of Finance. SARS administers it. But here's our reflection, that the relief measures that the president announced, that is at the moment penciled in at 70 billion rand, the main purpose of that from the perspective of jobs and businesses was to provide some relief for those businesses that you mentioned, like tourism, social services, and even initially the industries that were shut down in lockdown level 5. The companies that were able to continue to do business, they will pay their fair share in terms of current tax policy. So there is no intention to have a differentiated tax policy treatment. The tax relief measures was meant to compensate for that.
Now, how long will these tax relief measures last? When will you begin to taper them off? And what effect will tapering them off have?
So we know that relief is a short-term measure.
Yeah.
And eventually, you have to get the engine of the economy going. And so if we do not get that right, there will be no stimulus or no relief package big enough. So we must understand that relief is not a permanent measure.
In the South African,
it is merely to...
In the South African sense, in the South African context, when do you think this tapering off will happen? And if it happens simultaneously to the tapering off of the grants and the top-ups, will that not create great social upheaval?
I think there are two ways or two aspects. The first is social relief grants, the UIF payments, and the other relief to the vulnerable and the unemployed. My own sense, Tandeka, is that given the extent of the inequity and the backlog that we have already had before COVID, to ensure social inclusion, our social safety net will be required for the foreseeable future.
Right.
That's the one area. The second area, which is the more sustainable, is to create economic capacity, to provide people decent work so that they can become self-reliant. And so any form of relief, however necessary it is now, cannot provide the ultimate solution to social inclusion and dignity to our people.
Now, we're fast running out of time, and I would like to ask you, what is your message to every taxpayer in South Africa? What are you saying to all of us out there?
I think, first of all, that we accept that all of us must remain tax compliant. Because if we withhold our taxes, we hurt the wrong people. We hurt the granny who relies on the social old age grant that feeds an extended family. The young mother who would be destitute. So that's the first. We have to ensure that we give our fair share. The second is we must demand more of the government, who is employed to deliver goods and services.
And employed by us.
And employed by us.
Yes.
That's our tax money. We must expect more, and we must hold our office bearers, including people like me, hold us to account. And often we become complacent. And we complain about our tables when we dine and we wine, but we go on with our life.
Mr. Kiswete?
The third is to demand more of civil society and private business.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening. You've heard it from the taxman himself, Mr. Kiswetter, who joined us this evening. The tourism sector is breathing a sigh of relief after President Cyril Ramaphosa announced the reopening of the borders. International travel is set to reopen on the 1st of October, both for leisure and business. But while the sector has welcomed the news, there is still a lot of uncertainty.
A quaint village known for its mist-shrouded mountains. Tourism here is central and boasted by international tourists. The sector has embraced reopening of borders.
We'll have that sector back, which is fantastic because there's a gap now where things they used to buy, and now we'll have that back. So yeah, I'm happy.
This guest house is still battling to stay afloat since lockdown. Only 2 rooms are occupied, and hotels and guest houses in the area are hoping for bookings. But there are uncertainties.
Normally have quite a large number of international tourists who are corporate, not private travel, but we are corporate. And even they now, the companies they work for are still a little bit, I'd say, on the scary side, sending people down for a multitude of reasons. Some people have to still go into quarantine. No company can send a consultant to South Africa that has to sit in a hotel for 2 weeks. They can't afford it. It's just too expensive. Secondly, borders can still suddenly close because of a flare-up of infections.
Travel agencies have also been impacted. While they welcome the move, they too foresee challenges such as airline availability, restricted countries, and COVID-19 fluidity.
Of course, that is wonderful news. I just think that there are going to be quite a few challenges because we're not only affected by the rules that our company or our country has put in place for the COVID problem, but all the other countries as well. So you are going to be challenged on a daily basis because it is a liquid situation. It changes regularly.
While the sector is pleased, they admit it will take months to recover from the impact of COVID-19. Dumela Machogo, SABC News, Kapsewap.
Now on Skype, we are joined by Riel Malan, who is a member and a leader of the Young Presidents Organization, the YPO, and Managing Director of Unlimited Group. He will be talking to us about the further reopening of the economy and especially the tourism industry. Welcome, Riel.
Thank you, Zandeka.
Now, what were you expecting from the economic recovery plan?
Well, I mean, I think what we need to grapple and deal with as an economy is huge, and it's got so many facets that some parts of it I think can be seen as very positive, and then of course there will always be components that we feel that can get more attention or it requires a little bit more effort.
And you, what did you want to see?
Well, I think we realize that it's a tremendously deep hole that we're finding ourselves in. And I think we need to become very, very creative. I mean, one of my concerns is that a lot of the aid and of the assistance that is supposed to flow through banks and through the financial sector is just not hitting the pavement. So I think creative solutions to find ways to really actively kickstart the economy for me is critical.
So you're saying that they must find ways to unblock the blockages that emerged with the 200 billion loan guarantee scheme so that that money can find its way into the economy and actually help companies.
Exactly. I mean, we have had in our membership and even from a personal perspective, we've had a number of examples where the companies that clearly qualify for these assistance packages for some reason, either the red tape or some of the of some of the parameters of these loans are just making it impossible for that to actually hit ground zero.
Now, you heard the commissioner, our tax commissioner, Mr. Kieswetter. He said that the relief afforded, the tax relief afforded to companies is temporary, and that the relief by its very nature wasn't designed to last very long. What do you think will happen to many companies once that relief ceases?
Well, I think the relief, if we start from consumer level up, because I think at the end, all companies sell goods and services at the end to consumers. So let's start with the consumers. I mean, you've had 2, 3 months, 4 months of COVID relief. The economy hasn't picked up. We had massive job losses. I think your consumer demand will be affected by this very, very negatively. And sort of connecting into what Mr. Kieswetter said, the relief has been temporary, but now we need to come back to, I think, creative ways to kickstart the economy. There's an interesting discussion a while ago about the tech sector in the US. What was the pivotal point in the tech sector that kickstarted it in the 80s? And essentially, if you break it down, it was a period where capital gains on technology investments were effectively stopped. And it attracted a massive amount of investment into that sector and created Silicon Valley and the very strong tech sector in the US that we see today. So what I'm saying is I think we need to really go back and look at the ways to find capital to flow to the economy. We're hearing on a daily basis that there's more cash sitting on the balance sheets and reserves of companies than ever before.
And that money must be released into the economy.
Exactly, but if there's a perception of risk, and if I mean, at the end, capital flows to where it finds the best return. So we need to, I think, with small tweaks and with creative tweaks, we can incentivize capital to be deployed in our economy, because it's not at the moment.
Okay, so on that note, we have to end our discussion. Thank you very much. We have to incentivize capital and encourage consumption in the economy. Well, that's how we come to the end of Economics Unbound this evening. Thank you for joining us. Khonantini mawethu, zilondolozeni.